Memory making was a central part of Roman life. The Roman Empire was littered with monuments and statues, all placed strategically to manipulate the collective memory. These monuments were powerful visual objects as they etched their rhetoric into public life. Moments in history, reputations, victories, and deeds of generosity were all set in stone to remind passerby of an event. Not only would a statue or altar tell of a great happening, but the solidity of the stone itself would signify the everlasting power of its erector. Augustus's Ara Pacis is one such example of a monument meant to leverage collective memory and gain public affection. The Ara Pacis was a war memorial originally set on the outskirts of Rome that effectively communicated the prosperity and peace that the empire would experience under Augustus's leadership. The monument depicted scenes that pulled imagery from Roman myth and religion that bolstered Augustus's claim of divine ancestry and the divine fulfillment of his reign. He used images that would have been immediately understandable and relatable to citizens to reinforce his reputation and legitimacy. Monuments such as these served a very important purpose for ruling political parties or families. Those that held power, such as emperors or members of the Senate, controlled the visual landscape and thus the collective memory of Rome. Visual reminders of who was in power and their great victories were powerful tools in controlling how the past was remembered. Even if their version of history or event wasn't embraced unanimously by the citizens, those in power were able to offer their version up as the dominant one. The fact that monuments such as Augustus's Ara Pacis have been recovered and remain iconic of the Roman Empire is a testament to how successful such hegemonic tactic was. Augustus has gone down in history as a quote-unquote good emperor, and therefore his memory has never been subjected to mutilations or recarvings. Many emperors were not so lucky. Bad emperors, who were unable to maintain power or failed to meet the ideal Roman standards and image, were often posthumously condemned to be removed from the visual memory and record. Their portraits were torn down or recarved to be more acceptable, their faces scrubbed from the collective memory of Roman streets and monuments. This process is modernly known as damnatio memoriae. It was viewed as the greatest of punishments for persons considered tyrants or enemies of the state and Senate. Damnatio memoriae is a Latin phrase meaning condemnation of memory, used to describe memory sanctions employed to punish people who were considered tyrants, criminals, or other offenders of the reigning power. Though they live under the guise of morality, the purposes of memory sanctions also had benefits for the ruling powers. Image and reputation were strongly related to political activity in ancient Rome. An emperor or dynasty needed to uphold their reputation in order to maintain power, and if that was compromised, they were at risk of losing everything. Generations of Romans employed damnatio memoriae in order to weed out those that opposed them, and even their less than moral family members. By erasing or altering the memory of the abusers, they were able to literally rewrite their history. Romans were in the habit of creating a history that suited the present they wished to live in. The English word memory does not hold the same implication that its Latin counterpart, memoriae, does. Romans did not believe in a corporeal afterlife, and therefore the preservation of their memory in the form of monuments or inscription was the equivalent of a life after death. To have these reminders erased or disfigured effectively removed the person's hope of an afterlife. It would also effectively remove that person's image from the collective memory. Collective memory consists of a group's shared memories or knowledge that is significant not just to the individual, but the identity of the whole group. Certain events, social understandings, or group experiences contribute and construct the memory of the collective society or a nation or religious group. While individual memory can be considered ephemeral and will eventually cease to exist, a collective memory can continue through generations. It can continue through storytelling, myth, monuments, or other such group activities. The term collective memory was coined by this guy, Maurice Alpbach. Other philosophers and sociologists have researched the concept of a cultural or collective memory. People like Sigmund Freud, Jacques Derrida, and Bertolf Molden. Molden most recently has furthered a discussion of mnemonic hegemony's effect on the collective memory. The hegemonic narratives of history are often in conflict with the narratives of the silent majorities. The historical record of a society's collective memory can be, but isn't always, removed or against an actual group's experience. The social discourse in such a case is decided by those in power or the institutions that grant the power of such a narrative. In terms of Roman society, those in power were usually the Senate and the current emperor. In order for an emperor to delegitimize a previous emperor, they would need to cast aspersions upon that person's memory. They would need to denigrate their time spent at the helm and discredit their efforts for the Roman citizens. Damnatio Memoriae was a very effective way to visually center these defamations in the landscape and everyday lives of people. Statues and portraits of emperors and society's elite were an integral part of the visual landscape in Rome. Therefore, when someone was subjected to Damnatio Memoriae, their portraiture was one of the first things to be altered or removed. When a political transition occurred, the offending emperor's portraits would be removed from display and mutilated. In several cases, the mutilation was enacted through recutting them into the different likenesses, either to that of a new emperor or to that of a previous quote-unquote good emperor. Nero, the very last of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, was one such bad emperor, condemned as a hostess by the Roman Senate. Nero's reign as an emperor was viewed by the nobility as decadent and flamboyant. His love of performing on stage and frequenting taverns with his youthful friends was seen as distasteful and an act against his heritage as the great-great-grandson of Augustus. Arranging the murder of his mother Agrippina also did not endear him to anyone. After his suicide in 68 CE, his visage was subjected to Damnatio Memoriae. Several of his imperial portraits were recarved into images of Flavian rulers Vespasian, Titus, and Domitian, or that to Augustus. There are a few reasons that a portrait or statue could be reused or recut. On a pragmatic note, it was very economical to reuse marble. Instead of carving from a whole new block of very expensive marble, reusing an old emperor's statue was a much cheaper and quicker option. Often, the head of a statue would be removable for such circumstances. Why go through the painstaking process of carving a whole new statue when you can just change the face? This is the reason some busts seem small for their attached bodies, or the face appears too flat in profile. These are signs that the bust has been recarved. A bust of Vespasian in the Cleveland Museum of Art has been identified as a recut portrait of Nero. Vespasian had two types of imperial portraits, a romanticized one and a realistic one. The realistic versions were popular among the aristocracy, whereas the classic portraits were aimed toward the middle and lower classes, as they evoked memories of Augustus. The Cleveland bust displays the more classic version of Vespasian. It was identified as being recut, as some defining Neronic features remain. The hair at the back of the head is cut abruptly to shorten Nero's long curls to Vespasian's short locks. Nero's trademark curls also still rest above the ears on either side of the face. The Julio-Claudian family traits of small hooded eyes and a receding lower lip are also still obvious. Recutting a portrait also played a conceptual and political role. Such iconoclasm signaled the beginning of something as well as the erasure of something, but special attention was given to the fact that something was erased. Reusing a statue or bust and leaving characteristics of the sanctioned emperor behind signaled to the viewer that he or she had been bested by a more powerful person. Such present visual cues would permeate the past, casting its characters as heroes and villains, winners and losers, or victors and crooks. This bipolar comparison between the triumphant and defeated was a powerful semiotic tool in altering the collective memory of a society so well versed in public images. Any Roman familiar with the imperial portrait would have seen these altered characteristics and understood their layered meaning. Imperial statues would sometimes also be physically attacked by citizens to express their frustrations or contempt for the deceased emperor. A passage from Pliny the Younger's Panegyricus describes the defacement and mutilation of Domitian's bronze and marble statues after his subjection of Damnatio Memoriae. Quote, "However, his countless golden statues in a heap of rubble and ruin were offered as sitting sacrifice to the public joy. It was a delight to smash those arrogant faces to pieces in the dust, to threaten them with the sword, and savagely attack them with axes, as if blood and pain would follow every single blow. No one controlled their joy and long-awaited happiness, when vengeance was taken in beholding his likenesses hacked into mutilated limbs and pieces, and above all, in seeing his savage, hideous portraits hurled into the flames and burned up, in order that they might be transformed from things of such terror and menace into something useful and pleasing." End quote. These graphic and vengeful actions are a testament to how important images were in Roman culture. Statues and physical depictions acted as effigies of the deceased, and their obliteration was an act of violence against the person themselves and their memory. By denying the images to remain, they were also denying that person's right to be remembered in a positive light and therefore to have an afterlife. While cathartic for the citizens, it was also a show of allegiance to the new emperor and his policies. Relief sculpture and painted images could also meet the same fate as portraiture when subjected to damnatio memoriae. 2 panels from the Gate of the Argentari in Rome bear the signs of erasure and mutilation from the memory sanctions cast by Emperor Caracalla of the Severan dynasty against his brother, wife, and father-in-law. Both panels have glaring open spaces, one clumsily reworked and the other completely void, that signal to an erasure. The Gate of the Argentari was erected by the Guild of Silversmiths or Bankers in 204 CE in honor of the Severan family. It consists of 2 large panels that depict members of the family performing libations. Originally, Panel A showed Septimius Severus, his wife Julia Domna, and their son Geta. Panel B showed Caracalla, his wife, and her father. There was also an inscription that named and honored each individual. Caracalla and Geta ruled jointly after the death of their father, Septimius Severus, in 211 CE. Caracalla accused Geta of trying to have him killed, and he was murdered for his treason. In the same year, Caracalla had his wife killed. Both were then subjected to a systematic damnatio memoriae, just as his wife's father had been, in 205 CE. In the case of the Gate of the Argentari, each figure is treated differently in its erasure. Geta's erased image in Panel A has been clumsily reworked to fill in the now empty space at his mother's side. A half-hearted attempt has been made to cover the awkward spot with Julia Domna's garment and arm, but the partial caduceus that floats randomly in the top right corner breaks the illusion. The composition remains noticeably unbalanced. Panel B displays a more obvious empty space where Plautilla and Plautinius originally stood next to Caracalla as they performed libations. The 2 figures have been crudely and aggressively chiseled away from the relief. Gouge marks still remain where they once were, and the spot has seen no attempt at reworking. Though either panel has been treated differently in the process of damnatio memoriae, the result of both is that attention has been called to the erasures themselves. In terms of Derrida, the empty space left by the erasure has become the sign of the forgotten. Semiotically, the viewer is prompted to remember that someone has been forgotten by the very marks that removed their presence. Erasers such as Plautilla's and Plautinius that leave behind chisel marks and gouges can call back to Pliny the Younger's remarks on the destruction of Domitian's statues. Visual signs of such aggression are evidence of a type of performance in iconoclasm. Such performances acted upon conspicuous monuments within the visual landscape would have resonated with the Roman society and thus upon their collective memory. Since these monuments were part of everyday Roman life, the commentary these actions signified would have been obvious to any citizen. Similarly performative, but on a much larger scale, was the destruction and erasure of Nero's Domus Aurea, or his Golden House. A great fire ravaged Rome in 64 CE, burning for 9 days and destroyed 10 of Rome's 14 regions. Nero seized a significant amount of land damaged by the fire to build his house, the Domus Aurea. It stretched from the Palatine to the Esquiline, but was never completed. After Nero's forced suicide in 68 CE and subsequent damnatio memoriae, the Domus Aurea was filled in and covered by the Baths of Titus and the Flavian Amphitheater, otherwise known as the Colosseum. Descriptions of the structure have survived the centuries in writings by Suetonius, Tacitus, and other Roman historians. Most primary sources speak of Nero's Golden House disparagingly and portray him as a despot. For instance, Tacitus claims that after the Great Fire, Nero availed himself of his country's desolation and erected a mansion. The issue with these sources is that most of them were written years after Nero's reign and sometimes at the request of current emperors. Therefore, it is conceivable that these writers were influenced by the controlling narrative of the victors and their successful propaganda. propaganda. It is also possible that these historians were either on the payroll of the Senate and therefore encouraged to write them in a good light, or merely writing out of an effort of self-preservation. There is a fair amount of evidence that suggests the Domus Aurea was meant to be both a public and private establishment, especially considering Nero's fondness for entertaining and performing. Nero also was popular among the non-elite members of society and remained so even after his subjection to Damnatio Memoriae. It is possible, therefore, that after his death and the destruction of the Domus Aurea, Nero's imperial successors controlled the social narrative of how his memory would be treated by manipulating the visual record. They successfully used their position to present a moral narrative of working in favor of society and its citizens while admonishing their rival as an endangering society. By removing Nero's palaces and placing a monument of their own in the same spot, future leaders were conceptually replacing Nero with themselves, better, stronger leaders. They demoralized Nero by replacing his seemingly selfish and extravagant personal residence with places for public entertainment. A large part of collective memory is created through experience and communal activities. So naturally, an amphitheater or a bathhouse would help cultivate positive narrative among citizens. Martial's De Spectaculis from 80 CE contains a passage that proves even 12 years after Nero's death, people were still cognizant of what once stood where the new amphitheater was. Here, where the rayed colossus see closely the stars, and in the middle of the way great machines arise, the palace of a savage king once gleamed and, alone, dominated all the city. Here, where the imposing mass of the amphitheater draws all eyes, once lay Nero's pool. The epigram makes clear that topography and places for Romans became memory centers and held the past within their present. Rome itself became a palimpsest of memories and experience. However, it also proves that collective memory was malleable and vulnerable to corruption. The victor used their dominant narrative to legitimize their political position and to effectively manipulate the collective memory. This system of using architecture and statues to signify power and hegemony in Rome is ancient and powerful. It can and has continued through centuries. There are several cases of the Catholic Church rededicating ancient Roman temples to the Virgin Mary or Christ, such as the Pantheon. The Colosseum is also a site visited every year by Christians to honor the martyred. St. Peter's statue has been used as a visual rhetorical tool to claim dominance over several Roman structures by the Catholic Church. By taking an iconic Roman structure and turning it into a church or a holy place venerating saints and Christian martyrs, the Catholic Church manipulates the legacy of the Roman Empire to demonstrate their dominance and their narrative on the collective memory. Remembrance and memory were central to Roman belief in everyday life. They placed value in being remembered well after their death and therefore went to great lengths to procure objects that would preserve their memory. Statues, inscriptions, reliefs, and buildings, and many more were erected or carved into stone and metals to ensure that they were not forgotten, and in some way be immortal. With such emphasis on the visual landscape, the altering or erasing of these structures was therefore a powerful tool in rhetoric and thus on the collective memory. Damnatio Memoriae was much more than a punishment in the Roman world. It was a way to control the narrative and the perception of the past. Power, however, was a double-edged sword, in that mnemonic hegemony was only completely possible during an emperor's lifetime. Thus, as we've seen, the successor had the power to change or alter the narrative at will, and therefore alter the collective memory of a society.